how many babies are sucked, cut, and pulled out. Today, instead of having a birth that's joyful, loving, and orgasmic, they're having births that are traumatic. You know, how vulnerable you are when you're on your back, you're naked, your legs are spread, and strangers are there. That's not the environment to birth, right? Her birth orgasm was like being one with the universe. She said she never felt so connected to the divine as she brought her baby into the world.
Welcome to Beyond Perception. I'm Simon, coach and your host. My guest today is Debra Pascali-Bonaro, who has been teaching childbirth education and training birth professionals for over 30 years in over 40 countries. She shares her knowledge through films, books, educational programs and retreats as the co-chair of the International Childbirth Initiative, chair of the International MotherBaby Childbirth Initiative, and as a DONA International Doula Trainer. She taught thousands of parents, doulas, midwives, doctors and nurses in the safest and most pleasurable ways to support a healthy, empowering birth experience. Welcome, Debra.
Oh, thank you, Simon. It's truly a pleasure and honor to be here with you today.
So it is mine. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And I have to share a little bit of a context. And most probably it was 2-3 months ago that I reached out to request you for an interview. And just before I had watched a movie, I don't remember which one it was, with my wife about pregnancy, and childbirth was portrayed as painful, terrifying, even disgusting, which I think is also the predominant experience in our society, possibly. But then also briefly after, I watched your movie, Orgasmic Birth, the film, where you advocate for a very different possibility, a pleasurable and orgasmic birth. And that intrigued me to reach out to you.
I'm so honored. And it's really great to know how that came about, because yes, the total paradigm out there is pain and fear, and more fear because the more we're afraid of pain, the more afraid we get of the whole experience. And it does not have to be that way. So I'm so honored that you watched our documentary, because it opens up, right, a new look. What were, now I'm curious, what were the things that stood out for you?
So my perspective opened, I think, over the last 5-6 years. But when I look back, how I would have answered that 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I think the connection between orgasm, sexual experience and birth, that would have been so absurd. Like how you could even think of that way.
Right, not in the same sentence.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
And yet, right, isn't it odd that we've separated that? Like, I know we have a lot of taboos around sexuality, a lot of body shame, especially speaking for so many women, right? We also have a lot of taboos around birth, again, that it's just painful and scary and terrible. And so when you have all those taboos that have silenced us in some way from really exploring the connection, it is the common response of people saying, no way. But when you can take the pause to say, what's triggering that response? What is the no way? Why can't we think about that? The energy of conception in most cases is sexuality. And even when we use assisted technology, there's still intention and love behind it, right? There's still that intention of joy and love to create life. And yet why that the culmination of that birth, why should that be shrouded in just pain? And so when we can ask those questions, why, we certainly know when we're making love, that's a part of our sexual life. why we're okay with starting life with sex, but don't put them together in birth, even though the same organs are responsible. For a woman, right, we have pleasure from the cervix, from the vagina, from the clitoris, from the labia, from the nipples. Like there's all, and everyone has their own erogenous zones, but we can associate these parts with sexuality and intimacy. But I don't understand how when it comes to birth, we've sterilized them. So we're thinking those same body parts that can bring us immense pleasure on this day of birth are only designed to give us pain? No way. Right? We know from the physiology perspective, particularly the clitoris, is 8 to 12,000 nerve endings. It varies, we're all unique, but their sole purpose is pleasure, and they have to play a role in childbirth. It's just that we haven't looked at how to optimize that pleasure, and we haven't really taught people, even in general life, many people haven't had good education about their bodies, about pregnancy, about sexuality. And so if we have those lack already going into it, then yes, it's going to be harder to connect it. But if we can see pregnancy and even pre-pregnancy as a time to heal any past trauma, to address the shame and the taboos, to learn more about our bodies and what brings us pleasure, we're setting the stage for a completely different experience in birth.
In the meantime, what you're saying makes so much sense to me. But what would you say that looking into what probably most people associate with birth, and even I, when I look back, what I was educated and watching the movies, and there's always a certain picture portrayed. What do you think is wrong in the sense of how we relate to birth and our common understanding of pregnancy and childbirth?
I think it goes back several generations. You know, if it was 100 years earlier, but we were who we were, right? But let's go back to, 1924. Almost all birth all around the world took place at home. And so if you think about it, I don't know, do you have any younger siblings in your family? Do you have any younger brother? Yeah. Yes. You would have been at that birth. Do you have younger cousins? Maybe, your parents have siblings. You would have been at those births, because more than 100 years ago, women came together to offer comfort and support. We learned about birth by being at birth as children. And not to say they weren't challenging, but they were also joyful, right? And people didn't lay in a bed when they were in their home. They moved, they ate, they drank, they interfaced with family members, and children who were there playing and laughing were nearby. And so a lot of this knowledge of how to keep birth comfortable, keep people moving, keep people living their life till the moments that they need to tune into birth, got lost. When we moved birth from home to hospital, we literally put it behind closed doors. If we go back, and it's still happening in too many places today, women in labor come in all alone. And they did for generations in the US and in other parts of the world. And this knowledge of movement, of being surrounded by people that we love, of when we're struggling and lose faith, can I do it? Looking into the eyes of our elders who did it before us and said, you got this. This is hard, but let me rub your back. Let me jiggle those hips. Let's sing a song together. Let's say a prayer, right? Partners, let's touch and hug and kiss. These very simple things that were just a part of birth got stripped and sterilized away. And when people were alone, they were scared. Rightfully so. And you had a system that meant well. They thought they were doing good care. I don't think people got up and said, let me be mean. But they started putting women down, both literally, physically into beds, which we know from science makes labor longer, harder, and more painful. You lay down, your labor's going to be harder. You have to be up and moving to help that baby to move. So just the physical act of making the bed the place for birth made it more painful. And then emotionally, people were alone and afraid, rightfully so. And emotionally, they were put down. They were not told to trust their body. They were told to trust the medical team. So depending on where you are in the world, this legacy has been 100 years or maybe only 40 or 50 years. But the fact that this happened, many people today, the first birth they see is their own. We no longer have that wealth of wisdom that would have come by birth in community, where we'd have these skills and knowledge of how to approach birth. And I also think it would have taken away a lot of the fear. So some of that to me is the beginning of we lost a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and most people today don't even realize they're missing it.
And what is the consequence of this shift in birth paradigm? What does this lonely birth in the hospital lead to for both the child but also the relationship to its parents?
Yeah. I mean, for many women today, instead of having a birth that's joyful, loving, and orgasmic, they're having births that are traumatic. We're seeing traumatic birth on the rise all around the world. We're seeing that means they're more at risk for postpartum depression. PTSD is what people experience when there are severe natural things like hurricanes and earthquakes and disasters. And sadly, for the many people today that are in war zones, right? And so to take someone who's giving birth that should be in an environment that's safe and loving and turn it into one equivalent to these disasters is tragic for those people, but also for our families, for our communities, for our children. Mothers are going to struggle to do all they want to do when they're facing trauma rather than love and support and nurturing. So I think it's having a huge ripple effect. And on the very least level, even if people come out of birth feeling physically whole and emotionally okay, they may have had a longer labor that's more painful than it needed to be if they weren't moving and incorporating a lot of the techniques. I call them pleasure techniques, but it's simple things like dance and song and things that bring you joy. When we're in our feel-good hormones, our love hormone, oxytocin, birth is going to be easier, quicker, and more gentle. When we're stressed, when we're afraid, when we don't feel safe, we're in our stress system. Our catecholamines, we know, are not good for us on any day, but especially in birth, because if we're feeling stress in birth, our body is going to shut down birth, because basically as a mammal, we all are, we're designed not to give birth in a place that we don't feel safe and private. So if we're in an environment that's stressful, our body says, stop, shut it down, and let's give that person time to get to a safer space. That would be the case for the lioness out on the prairie. If they had to just drop in labor in the open, that system protects them, so they have the energy that the stress hormones give to get them to the lion's den, the safe, private space, so they can give birth. But for humans, our labor slows or shuts down, and we say, okay, we got drugs, we've got ways to keep your labor going, and we keep pushing labor. We're not listening to what the bodies really need. We're saying, you're here, we got 24 hours, this is a bed, we got to turn it over, we got someone else coming in. And so we're overusing valuable technology. And truly, our drugs, our surgery are life-saving when needed. But the rates that we're using them now around the world, I think are a human rights violation, because we know that some people are being put at risk because of the overuse. Some mothers and babies are having really poor outcomes because they didn't need that. They really needed someone to say, let's get up, let's dance, let's move, let's get you a doula, let's help you to use your body's ability to find where you're most comfortable listening to your baby, because our babies guide us during the process. When we can listen, they'll let you know which position is better than another, so they can wiggle a shoulder or nudge their head down. So when we can really feel our bodies, when we can work with them, when we can be in an environment with people that are supporting us, that trust us and trust birth, and we feel safe and private and unobserved, birth is so different. You know, all those people that say, how could it be anything but pain? I always say, tell me what position you were in. Tell me what support was there. Tell me what other people were saying to you, because most of the time you don't realize how all those influences are really shaping your experience and sometimes not giving you access to the range of comfort that you really could have.
And I'd imagine that is also the first initial imprint on the newborn, this stressful environment or situation of stress that both the mother and the child is being exposed to.
Totally. We're really learning. There's a whole new field called perinatal psychology, where we're learning that through pregnancy, right, babies become alert and aware in that process. They're listening. Their hearing starts around 34 weeks. They're feeling, you know, mother's emotions are literally bathing them in her hormones. So if she's having a pregnancy that's more gentle, more loving, and it's interesting, if you look at more indigenous cultures, without having any of the science we have today, they often have beliefs that pregnant women needed to be protected, to be in environments where they were loved and nurtured, and to not be put into all the day-to-day stresses that might be going on in the broader community or family. And science is now validating that ancient wisdom was very accurate from a hormonal level. We also know the baby's stress system is often set from where the mother's stress is. So a mother that has a very high stress environment during pregnancy and birth is setting her baby to be ready to be in the world with a higher stress system. So like we're just at the tip of the iceberg from the physiology perspective and really learning, but we're also knowing that that first hour or two and days are so critical in how babies are welcomed and what they feel about the world. What is their first experience? Is this a warm, safe, loving world? Or are you separated onto an isolette with strangers rubbing you? The temperature's cold, you're crying, and no one's listening to your voice. How many people today as adults feel they're not seen and heard by family members? We have to look that we're learning that first hour is sacred. There's a sensitive window. If we look at other mammals and animals, if you take a baby goat away from the mother for 20 minutes, rub it down roughly, give it a little bath, put some ointment in its eyes, and give it back in 20 minutes, what does the mother do?
Reject it.
Totally reject it. And that baby would die if a human didn't get involved. And for anyone listening, you should never feel guilty, because we have human brains. And if you as a baby were separated from your parents, or if you've given birth and your baby needed special care, we can overcome that. We can heal and we can bond and love our children and heal that at any time. But the question is, why would we want to create situations that we need to heal from when we know that if that baby's born and goes skin to skin, chest to chest, that we're getting so many benefits that first hour or two? We know that the mother and the father, that partner's body is covered in microbiome. And that's kind of sets our gut, right? Which we're saying our gut health is really our immune system, because babies have been in water for 9 months and their intestinal tract doesn't have any bacteria to colonize it. So if their first contact is with a hospital warmer, ooh, think of the kind of things they're getting to colonize rather than skin to skin with either, or ideally in time, both their parents. So they're getting their family's microbiome, getting a healthy gut. We also know that that mother that just gave birth, which this is amazing to me, her body temperature goes up 2 degrees to warm her baby, or down 1 degree. No other human can adjust their body temperature to the baby's needs except that person that just gave birth. How does our body do this? That we're so connected for 9 months in this inner womb, and now it's like there's an outer womb. The bodies are still connected and they regulate each other. So when we put a baby on a warmer to so-called keep them warm, we don't. They're more likely to lose body heat over there faster than if they were on the body of their mother. The other thing that skin to skin does is regulate heart rate and breathing. And we know when a baby is separated, they immediately have a response called protest, despair. And just the word, you can like imagine a baby protesting. Those poor little things are screaming. And no one, if you don't heed their voice and their cry to say, get me back to my mom, get me to my dad, get me to a voice that I'm familiar with, they go into despair. And those little ones in despair have really high, sometimes 10 times the adrenaline levels of normal. And that high adrenaline will actually put them into lower body temperature, irregular heart rate, irregular breathing. And the medical system says, see, they're having trouble, we need to separate them more, where really the response is, get them back. And even babies that need extra care would do better on their mother for the care. And then we could add oxygen or other things, but they'd be in the outer womb, their home that they need, with the contact and the voice and the heartbeat that they've known. So we're just starting to learn that those moments of separation, if it's your first experience, they imprint. If you take a baby chick and the first thing it sees is a fox, right? It's going to follow it, even if the fox is going to eat it. These are imprinting moments, and we need to do more studies. We need to learn more. But what you're saying, I think, is really good questions for everybody to heed, that the day we give birth is significant for the people giving birth, the partners, and the baby. And we haven't really given it the attention it deserves and asked the questions that need to be asked so that each person can birth where and with whom and how they want to, so it'll serve them and their baby to have a gentle, safe, respectful, peaceful, and I add pleasurable birth.
And I'd assume the time of birth is where the newborn is the most vulnerable and most innocent and most pure. So one would imagine that's the time where it needs the most protective environment, the most safe environment, and that seems to be not the hospital from.
No, although I have to give credit, there are some hospitals around the world that are transitioning. We say MotherBaby, and we say MotherBaby as one word, so no space between them. So when we say mother and baby, we put a space in our words, and then we feel like they're two people. They really need to stay as a dyad, and I'm seeing hospitals around the world that no longer have newborn nurseries. I went to one hospital, and they still had the space, they still had the bassinets, and they filled it with teddy bears, and then they gave the teddy bears out as people left, and I said, said, yes, no babies in the nursery, only stuffed teddy bears. That's the perfect nursery. And other places really have redesigned. So all care is right there with that mother, with the partner, with the family. So what's interesting about kind of maternity care is that if everybody was reading the science, we would have a constant everywhere and everywhere in the world. But we've had the science of what's best for so long, but practices really lag behind. And that's why it's hard, because if you're pregnant, you can't just assume that the local hospital is the same as the hospital 30 minutes away. And it's certainly different than a birth center and a home birth. So it really does take homework to start exploring what are the birth options and how do they differ. Because I'll have one hospital, I'm here in Asbury Park, New Jersey. I have a hospital that's got a cesarean rate of about 21%, and not that far away, I have a hospital with a cesarean rate of 50%. Those are huge differences, and those are your odds if you're a person going to that hospital. If you walk in the door, the 50%, you should flip a coin, because it's 50-50, because that's their paradigm. So if you don't know your options, you don't have any, right?
So,
like if you don't know what you and your baby are walking into, you're going to be subjective to what those practices are.
So give us some more options. Educate us about orgasmic birth. Is it literally orgasmic? Is it as pleasurable as sex?
And
how's that even possible?
Yes.
Just imagining a baby going through the birth canal, like I would connect pain with that experience.
Yeah. And, not to say that sometimes it isn't, but first of all, I think it's important to step back and say, what is orgasmic? And I always say that that's in the eyes of the beholder. And when I'm working with couples and clients, I always say, write your own definition. No one should put on you any definition or anything. And I will just share that Elizabeth Davis, a midwife, and I wrote the book, Orgasmic Birth, Your Guide to a Safe, Satisfying, and Pleasurable Birth. And we define orgasmic birth as broad enough to include the people that have a birthgasm, an orgasm at some time in labor and birth, but also to include anyone that has those moments of joy, pleasure, love, connection that bursts in their way, that bursts in their power. So all of our definition doesn't mean that there might not be those moments of challenge, intensity, or pain, but it also means that birth can offer many other moments as well. And I do think it's important to mention birthgasm. We don't know how many people have that happen. I can tell you that thousands of people have said to me it happened to them, and they never told their partner. They never told their husband. They never told their best friend. They certainly didn't tap their doctor on the shoulder and go, guess what just happened, right? If you don't tell your partner, you don't tell anyone. And most of the time, it's because they felt shame. They thought, I just had the most pleasure I could have imagined. And if I tell anybody, am I weird? Everybody only talks about pain. So we really don't have an accurate marker, and it certainly doesn't happen if we're overusing epidurals and drugs and interventions. But what we do know
So is this, just to clarify, is this what is preventing a more pleasurable and orgasmic birth experience?
Some of it is the procedures, definitely is the procedures. But I would flip it the other way too. I think it's the lack of education of women and men and people demanding that they want to move, that they want to bring pleasure to birth. And those practices, as I teach all these, from using balls and peanut balls, and you're in Mexico, right? The rebozo, and using ropes and slings and being upright. And so movement and different techniques are going to add to comfort and pleasure. Lack of mobility and leaning back or leaning down are going to add to pleasure. But I do want to go back that I wouldn't want anyone to put an orgasm as a performance standard. I think women in birth have enough to do that we don't need one more thing we have to accomplish to say we had an orgasmic birth. But I think we need to understand the physiology of why that's possible, because if you do have a birthgasm, I don't want people to feel they can't tell anyone. No one should be ashamed. I think you should be celebrating like, wow, right?
I would say that should be amazing.
I had one woman write me, and she really said, like, her birth orgasm was like being one with the universe. She said she never felt so connected to the divine and the world as she did in that moment of intense expansion as she brought her baby into the world. So when we can think of it separate from sexual orgasm, but think of it in the context of bringing life, our body was designed, and you know, you may know this, and certainly women listening know, that when we're turned on, right, we lubricate, we open. When we're turned off, we close down and we're dry. And when you think about how many babies are sucked, cut, and pulled out because women are not in an environment that's honoring their physiology, that's not, they don't feel safe, they don't feel honored, they're not upright, you know, how vulnerable you are when you're on your back, you're naked, your legs are spread, and strangers are there. That's not the environment to birth, right? I always say stand and deliver, don't take it lying down. And women, when they lean forward, I can grab something real quick right behind
Sure,
me.
yeah.
I have some magic things here that you'll like to see. I should have grabbed them earlier, but I keep them handy.
Yeah.
This is really my special box, and when we open it, we have a replica of a clitoris, and that's life size. And so most people don't realize how big the clitoris is when you look at the palm of my hand, right? We're so used to just thinking of the head. And when we take the female pelvis and we realize that the clitoris is going to cover the urethra, right? The vagina, it goes down into the pelvic floor, in through the vaginal walls, and that. When people lean forward when they're in labor, they're going to get that head to put more pressure here. And the clitoris is also designed to send not only feel-good feelings, but increase the flow of oxytocin, the hormone of love that needs to peak in birth and after birth. And when they're doing that, and people have a lot of pressure on the clitoris in general, those waves that we feel in birth, we call it the Ferguson response. It's actually waves that are helping that baby to be born. And if you look at like even medical texts, they often left the clitoris out. Like the shame is not just women. It's like not even in the textbook. Most doctors and midwives haven't been even trained on the role of the clitoris. And yet, if you have an organ this big, that's definitely going to be touched and impacted in birth. How have we left it out? It's crazy. So there's so much we can do. And I have many women that decide to touch themselves during labor to heighten their pleasure. We're using vibrators more and more because pain and pleasure travel on the same pathway. And if we stimulate pleasure, we're less likely to feel pain. Everybody is comfortable in the way that they are. I'm not advocating one way. I think it's just important that people get educated on all the ways that they can honor their body, their baby, their desires for birth, learn positions and techniques, and then I call it the pleasure treasure chest. Get a whole treasure chest of comfort and pleasure, and then decide, you know, what are the things that you want to put in your treasure chest that you want to have available to you when you're in labor and birth.
Wow. And for those women that you got to know or have heard the experience about a pleasurable and orgasmic birth, what what was the common denominator? That they moved? That's what you mentioned. That they stood? Is that the means to support?
There's not always a common, but I would say if I had to pick one, it would be movement, is that they didn't lay in a bed, they didn't stay still. And not that they didn't take moments to rest, but in general, they were leaning forward, they were moving, they put music on to kind of dance. And sometimes they're being intimate with partners, from kissing to stroking. You know, when I work with partners and dads and they're like, what do? I always say, you know best. Like, you turn her on, love her through labor. If you don't know how to do that now, then you better start practicing, because you really need to be able to really love her through labor, from your words to your touch, to your caresses, to, you know, all the ways that you can help her flow her oxytocin.
It makes so much sense, because sexual energy is, in its essence, it's creative energy, and a baby born is the essence of expression of creative energy. You know, so it totally makes sense that it comes together.
I love how you said that, Simon. That's so true, right? And you know, when you remove the fear and like really say, why are you afraid? What are the stories you were told? You know, were people being put down physically or emotionally or with words? You know, try to find the positive stories, you know, listen to stories and watch our documentary, Orgasmic Birth.
We will link it in the description, as well as your book that you mentioned. Yeah.
Please do, because I think that when we can expand what our knowledge base has been and we can look for other stories, then we can create other possibilities for ourselves. And you don't need to just show up and turn your body over to medicine. I think that's really, you know, even if you have a challenge or a risk, you should be a partner in your care. You know your body better than anyone. You know your baby better than anyone. And you need to make sure your voice and choice is in there, and that you've got a list of ways that you can bring joy, love, and pleasure no matter what birth asks of you. I have people that, you know, end up the safest thing for their baby is a cesarean birth. That doesn't mean we have to do it only with fear. We're still bringing love into the operating room. We're singing our babies into the world. We're doing early skin to skin and really thinking about the first words that baby will hear. There's so many ways we can birth with so much more love than what we're doing today.
So it's the one thing that prevents a pleasurable and joyful and orgasmic birth. Is it fear?
I think so. Fear is really a hard one. And I always say, like, write your fears down. Some of them are what I call false evidence appearing real. It's my acronym for fear, right? The FEAR. And so some of them, if you get knowledge is power, and you can kind of erase them off your list. Like, that's not true, that's not true.
What would be the most common fears women have about birth?
A lot of people, the fear is of pain. I see that number one. And that's where we can address that there may be some pain, but pain doesn't have to become suffering. And so look at other things. If you're an athlete, you might know those moments of pushing through the pain or getting to the shake or the burn, right? You don't necessarily give up. Often you keep going back to push through it. So looking at what is the type of pain that you're afraid of, what are ways that, as I said, we can mitigate a lot of the pain or put it into the more tolerable place. If we have a lot of different movement, comfort measures, pleasure practices, we can shift it. So fear of pain is pretty much number one. Some is fear of the outcome for either mother or baby. And those are fears we have to say can be real. You know, birth isn't perfect. And that's why choosing where and with whom and feeling confident that you're in the right place for who you are, feeling confident that you've hired caregivers that really have got you, that hear you, that listen and respect you, so that if things do come up, you're able to really be in a good place with a good team. So I feel that's important. And we know that for a lot of people, especially in the United States, right, our Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and women are often, because of racism, not heard, not seen. And they are at higher risk of poor outcomes, even death in childbirth. And often it's because they know something's not right, but nobody's listening to them. So we have to really educate people that your caregiver really matters, that they see and hear you in pregnancy, that you're in a place that you're going to be heard because you know your body best. So you're often the first person to say, like, this feels a little different. So that kind of fear can also be addressed as well in the care that you're going to have. The other thing that a lot of women have as fears is that people are going to see them in this vulnerable state. What if I poop? What if I scream? What is my body going to look like? What sounds are going to come out of my mouth? And I think, again, these are things that we need to work on. Some of it can come from body shame, where we just haven't been comfortable in our own skin. So the thought that anybody else would see this body is terrifying too. So working on body shame and just realistic expectations. If those are your fears, what are ways that we can help you in that? How can we keep you covered? Or what are the ways that the people around you know how you're feeling about these, and we can be protective? That's where I say doulas really come in, because doulas are there to understand those fears. And if there are fears, that doulas can then really make sure, if you're afraid, don't want to be naked, that would be terrifying, then we're going to make sure that we're trying to keep you covered in the way that feels safe to you. And many other fears come up are more individual. They can be more about what life will be like after a baby, and do we have enough money, and how are my partner and I going to adjust? Those are normal fears, right? And again, talking about them, communication is key, and getting into classes and with other parents that might have newborns. So hearing their stories and thinking about how people navigate things can be really helpful in beginning to develop the tools in the communication so that you can address the thoughts and feelings that are coming up for you.
Do you want to awaken from fear and negativity to lasting peace and inner wholeness? Do you dream of breaking free from the daily grind, poor relationships, the repressive system, to outer freedom and really living a fulfilling life you truly love? Both are possible. It's my story and of many others that I helped, and it can be yours. Test it. Get my free newsletter where I share the proven keys to live free inside out. So it seems that safety and privacy, being comfortable with whatever decision you make is really key. And pardon?
Yeah, very key. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to give birth there. If you don't feel private, your body is going to shut down, right? So these are things that I think people need to be mindful of. Tour your place of birth. Know what it looks like. And I'll add another tip. This is a doula tip, and we teach it in our classes, is you can change the environment. If you think of a typical hospital room, and I don't know if you can picture it in your mind right now.
Yeah, I have a picture, yeah.
Now,
it's bright, white,
right.
covered people in there.
Yeah. Now, would that be your ideal environment to make love?
No way. No, it's horrible, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the question to ask, because the environment you can make love in is the environment that's going to run the same hormones. The hormones of orgasm for women are the same hormones that have to come in birth. And if you can't go in and let those hormones flow, you're going to have a longer, harder labor. So if you can go into a birth environment and say, could I have great sex here? That's my question. And if that answer is no, then you have to say, well, could I change to another place like my home where I know I can have good sex, or a birth center, or what could I bring to change this room? So let's say you need a hospital. It's your only option, or for health risks you need there. Then what can you do? You know, bring electric candles in, bring aromatherapy, bring your own pillow, bring pictures. I always say create a birth altar and set little things around. Bring things that connect you to your ancestors and people that you have great love and wisdom. Think of the elders in your family that might not be able to be with you, but something from them, their wisdom, their blessings could be there. If we can't have that home environment surrounded by those we love, we can still bring that into birth. Birth is sensuous, and sensuality is that every sense we have is heightened. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we feel in touch is going to be accentuated in lovemaking. They either turn us on or turn us off, and in giving birth the same way. So you want to create an environment where you feel safe, private, and that it turns you on so that you can open fully to the experience and to birth.
So it seems to me, from a masculine perspective who has no clue about how it is to be in a female body, but that birth or what a woman is going through is really about surrendering the more rational, like intellectual capacity to a more inherent intuitive intelligence that knows how to get this done.
I can't believe you said that so beautifully, Simon, because I say to women all the time, you can't think yourself to orgasm, although very few can, and I know there are probably a few out there. But most of the time for women to orgasm, if we're thinking what we have to do tonight, what I didn't do today, what I have to do tomorrow, the kids need this, right? Nah. It ain't happening, right? The minute you get in your head, you're not into your body. And birth is the same thing. I say all the time, you can't think yourself through birth. If your head is in the game, your labor is going to be longer and harder. You really have to get into your body. And the people that'll say, like, it was painful, and all of a sudden, I decided I could surrender to it. I became one with the pain disappeared. Because then they merged with their body, because what we resist persists, right? If we're fighting, and I see people all the time, they're like, here comes another one. And they you can feel the tension in the room, right? And you know that's going to be a hard one, that's going to be a painful one, and that's going to be one that doesn't do anything, because you're not going to open when you're all tense like that. And when we eventually can get people to breathe, to relax, to sing, to moan, to do whatever, get out of their thinking brain and into that hind intuitive brain and go into liminal space. It's really shifting into the brainwave, right, of theta and delta, right? We've got to get into trance, into prayer state, into those places. And bright lights bring you back to thinking. People talking about what they had for dinner last night, right, break the whole trance. So it's not only the person giving birth, but you need a birth team that understands that this is intimate. This is sacred. We are honored when we're in someone's birth space to hold space for that magic to happen, for them to fully open. And I have women all the time that resist, and then you feel them just let into it, really go into that deep body wisdom. And they come out and one person said, my wild woman emerged. I got in touch with the deepest parts of myself that I didn't even know I had. And the sounds, the movement, the expression, I let her come out and I let her break free. And now postpartum sex is off the charts, because I figured once my partner saw the wildness, I don't have to hold it back anymore. And I loved it. I was like, what an expression. And yet, how many people are holding on because they're afraid to let that break free? They don't feel safe in a hospital or with the people around them. So we have a lot to do to even educate our doctors and midwives and nurses, along with parents, that birth has this element that by sterilizing and taking away sexuality from birth, we've done more harm than I think we know, especially for people who are survivors of sexual abuse. And I know that's many people. Birth, when you feel things are done to you without your voice and choice, is re-traumatizing. And if we acknowledge birth as a part of sexuality and we honor that not everyone has had a positive sexual life prior, then pregnancy and education can be deeper about healing, about expanding our sexuality, about finding and what we need and giving people permission for their voice to claim for themselves. What do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel private? How can we honor you so you can let the wildness go and feel safe in doing it?
So it seems that birth can or is, in essence, really this transcendental experience, an initiation into a different identity, if you will. Is that a possibility for any woman?
I agree. I think it 100% is. I think it was designed to be that. You said at one point, it's the culmination of creative energy. We're creating life within. You're full of life when you're pregnant. The sexual energy is creative energy. I think all these things are coming together. And I think birth was designed to be transcendent, because parenthood's a tough job. And you want to come into it having really found your strength. When you dive deeper than you've ever gone to give birth, and you faced your fears, and you found this depth that you didn't know was there, you come out ready to face anything. And it puts you in a place with parenthood, which is, I always say, your highest highs and your lowest lows in the same hour and the same day sometimes, right? But it gives you a strength that you not only take to parenting, which of course is essential, but you take that to your relationship. You take that into your life. You take that into your career if you are working. And I think that then impacts our families and our communities. So I always say, whether you're the one giving birth or whether you're supporting someone giving birth, as humanity, we should all care. We're in a bit of a crisis right now. I think by stripping away the power of birth from so many people, we're limiting the strength, power, and potential of so many people right now, from our mothers and people giving birth, our partners who bear witness to trauma and themselves are traumatized because they want the best for their partner. It's hard to be bi when birth isn't going the way you desire, or you're not respected, or you don't feel safe. So our partners are experiencing this too. And as you said, our babies are missing opportunities for this optimal state of welcome into a peaceful, respectful, safe, and loving world. And when you look at these three people coming away, mother, father, baby, not having this potential for strength and insights and trusting and knowing that they're capable of so much more than they thought, I think it's a big loss right now for humanity. And we all should be really, I applaud you for having me on your show to talk about a broad topic, because I think we all should care about how babies are coming into the world today.
And would you agree that what we see in our society today is to some extent related to the way we came into the world at the first hand? And then my next question would be, What do you see changing or different or possible for humans that are born with joy and pleasure?
Yeah. So
what is different in them, how they see and perceive life?
Right. And we need long-term studies to really answer that. But we are seeing more, and there is, again, I mentioned this field of pre and perinatal psychology that's doing this research about how people are born and how they live their life. And there's another field called primal health. Michelle O'Donnell is doing research like babies that are pulled out and sucked out by their head. We seem to have a much higher rate of eating disorders later on. And he's starting to correlate that babies that their mother needed a lot of medications during labor, particularly if they were Demerol, morphine, things like that. We're seeing more children in the teen years experimenting and going into drug addiction. So these are new studies now that are starting to really look at, again, this sensitive window that how we're born may actually be impacting. And many people are starting to say, when you have physical ailments, when you have things, everybody should be saying, do you know how you were born? Like, that should be a pivotal question in our health and well-being. I think we have a long ways to go to there. And again, I don't want anyone to ever feel sad or guilty if their beginning was less than optimal, because what all of these fields are realizing, if we acknowledge we haven't had the best welcome into the world, then there's always time for healing. But it takes acknowledging it. And there are many fields right now that are doing work to kind of reprogramming. If your birth was more traumatic or difficult or challenging, or if you were separated, how can we kind of give you those skills, especially if we can acknowledge it when they're infants, and look at how we can recreate that loving first touch in new ways. But I do think it's a message. We need more data, but I think intuitively, I would say, I believe that birth is a moment that's impacting who we are as a humanity. I think that too many people, if we look at the history, the last 50 to 100 years, have been disconnected, been cared for in newborn nurseries, not had the contact with their parents. And I hope we're at a time of change. You did in my intro, that's why I chair the International MotherBaby Childbirth Organization, and I co-chair the International Childbirth Initiative. We are two global initiatives that are taking the evidence, the love, the respect, putting it together, and really asking facilities and providers to step up and implement 12 steps so that everybody will have a positive birth in whatever situation arises for them that they either need or desire. And we are seeing providers around the world. I think many providers realize that we've gone too far. They meant well, we've meant well with medicine, but we need to come back and find a balance, how to use medicine with love and not use it if we don't need it. Like hands off, like lifeguards, right? If you're ever in a body of water, the lifeguard sits there. We don't even know who they are. And only when we're in trouble do they jump in. Right now, we've got all the lifeguards in the body of water kind of hanging on us, and we don't need them. Right? We've got to get back to that. We can do this. 99% of the time, usually, people could have a gentler experience if they had the knowledge, the power, and the support team around them to help them to navigate birth and dive deep within and trust that power and bring some pleasure.
Debra, thank you so much for taking the time to share this wonderful perspective with us. And because you mentioned it, just a small question. I know you have a fixed time budget for today, but you said you noticed that there's a trend, that things are shifting, that more people wake up to a different birth paradigm?
Yes, I definitely feel it. I'm seeing more providers, midwives, doctors, nurses, doulas for sure, because we've been always feeling that for a long time, that even, providers want a better birth for everyone. And I think the people, I think those that are pregnant or giving birth and they're hearing the positive stories, watching Orgasmic Birth, hearing us tell these stories, they're like, I want that too. Like, I think people know that they're missing something with what's been the current paradigm. So I think the shift is coming. I think it's going to take a lot of people speaking up. If it's not available in your community, you might be the first one starting it. We have to really give voice to birth in a way that we deserve and desire. I mean, I do teach, I have an Orgasmic Birth practitioner program where I'm teaching now doctors, nurses, and midwives about how to help people prepare for an orgasmic birth, because I feel like a lot of them know they want something different, but they don't know how to get there because it's not in their curriculum.
Obviously, everybody who is listening will find the information in the description to this podcast. So please go check it out. Watch the movie. It's amazing. Debra, thank you so much for being my guest and sharing this very inspiring insight.
Thank you, Simon. And to everyone listening, if you're giving birth or you know someone is, I wish them a joyful, pleasurable experience. So thank you.
So do I. Yeah. Thank you, dear audience. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it widely, subscribe to our channel, and most importantly, stay true to yourself, and see you next time.